All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John DeCoco. I am the Grants Unit Manager for the Office of the Attorney General. And today we're going to be going through the application process for the STOP and SASP grants. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. I'm sure I don't know if you noticed, but we are recording this presentation. So you may want to mute yourselves during the presentation to prevent any background noise being recorded. There will also be an opportunity at the end to ask questions, at which time you'll be invited to unmute if you'd like. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation today, you can enter them in the meeting chat and we'll try to answer them at the end of the presentation. We will also be providing a Q&A sheet, a question and answer sheet that would be posted with the presentation on the OAG website sometime next week. And also, since this is being recorded, you may want to turn off your cameras. Either that or just know that you will live on camera on our website. So let's go ahead and get started. So first we have to, as with all of these grants, we have to go over our attribution statement. This webinar was supported by a grant number for STOP and the other grant number for SASP, awarded by the Office of Violence Against Women in the U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this workshop are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Justice. And please remember that all materials created through these funds must be clearly labeled with this attribution statement above. And this is what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over the eligibility for applying for the grant, the STOP grant, the SASP grant, our state priorities, distribution of funds, the application process, the application packet, deadlines, which are ever important, our timeline, and the expectations and contact information associated with the grant. Okay, so for basic eligibility for the grant, you must have an active SAM registration, which provides you a UEI, a unique entity identifier. You also have to be a nonprofit organization or a governmental agency, can be tribal and non-tribal. Also must register as a vendor with the State of Nevada Controller's Office, and that is the website there to get, to the vendor registration. And this is essentially so we can make sure we have a way to reimburse you for the costs incurred on the grant. And that's why the State Controller's Office piece is necessary. Next slide. Here's our STOP. Actually, I think I skipped by one. No, I didn't. Sorry about that. Our STOP federal purpose areas. And there are several slides that go over this. They can also be found in more detail starting in page 8 of the NOFO. In order to receive the funding, the proposed project activities must fall under at least one of these purpose areas. And so we'll go through each of these individually. So we do have training for law enforcement judges, prosecutors, and other court personnel. There's develop, train, and expand personnel. Develop and implement more effective policies, develop and install or expand data collection and communication, develop, increase, or strengthen victim services and legal assistance, develop, increase, or strengthen programs of Indian tribes, support multidisciplinary efforts, train sexual assault forensic medical examiners, develop, increase, or strengthen programs to elders and victims with disabilities, provide victim with immigration assistance. Our next one, these are continued STOP purpose areas, maintain core services while increasing new services, support placement of the Jessica Gonzalez victim assistance, provide Crystal Judson domestic violence protocol programs, develop and promote legislation and policies that promote victim services, develop and implement or enhance SARTs or CCRs. So those are the sexual assault response teams or the coordinated community responses. Develop and strengthen policies related to investigation and prosecution. Develop, increase, or strengthen programs addressing sexual assault in correctional settings. And our last screen of STOP federal purpose areas are identify and conduct backlog inventory of sexual assault kits, develop, increase, or strengthen services for LGBTQIA+, develop, increase, or strengthen services for female genital mutilation, develop, increase, or strengthen evidence collection protocols, provide victim advocates and local government agencies to provide services, pay fees for victims' birth certificate, passport, or identification cards if necessary, and develop, increase, and strengthen culturally specific services. Now, and then we have our SASP federal purpose areas, and there's only one slide of these. They can also be found in more detail starting on page 11 of the NOFO. The SASP is for sexual assault services only. If the agency is requesting funding that does not have any sexual assault services, or the agency is ineligible for these services, please do not identify these SASP purpose areas in your application. The purpose areas are 24-hour hotline services, providing crisis intervention services and referral, accompaniment and advocacy through medical, criminal justice, and social support systems, crisis intervention, short-term individual and group support services, and comprehensive coordination and supervision. Information and referral to assist the sexual assault victim and family or household members. Community-based culturally specific services and support mechanisms, including outreach activities for underserved communities, and develop a distribution of materials on issues related to these services that are described here. Now, our state priorities are the state priorities for our domestic violence and sexual assault. And there's more details of these priorities on page 12 of the NOFO. And even though proposed projects are not required to fall under an actual state priority, however, applications falling under any state priority may receive preference in funding. So these priorities are to improve access to sexual assault forensic exam services for underserved victims, and improve investigation and prosecution of sexual assault crimes, improve understanding of and response to human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, improve intake procedures and service collaborations to increase victim access and better identify victim priorities, improve statewide, regional, and local utilization of resources and programs, continue the support of intimate partner violence fatality reviews and policy development, and support development of dual domestic violence and sexual assault programming in rural communities. Other priorities that can be included are the provision of trauma-informed care services and provision of healing-centered engagement. Now, applications that contain these priorities, along with the state priorities listed in the previous slide, will receive preference in funding decisions per page 12 of the NOFO. So that's also listed in the Notice of Funding Opportunity on page 12. And we just want to make sure we clarified that here. A reminder, although prevention is an allowed activity under STOP, funding is usually not adequate to fund prevention activities. And basically, most of the funding, because the STOP and SASP funding continued to be reduced year over year, while it not being a huge reduction, there's still more money that is needed for victim services versus prevention, and that's why it's usually not adequate enough to fund that, but more than welcome to try to apply for it if you'd like. The distribution of funds. These are the categories, and those of you that have been on previous pre-application webinars recognize these categories. There's 25% for law enforcement, 25% for prosecution, 30% for victim services, 5% for court projects, and 15% for discretionary. Now, on the note for the STOP funding is it must be distributed between these different categories at these federally set percentages. Additionally, within the victim services category, a minimum of 10% must be awarded to culturally specific community-based organizations, and a minimum of 20% of that must be awarded between at least two categories that address sexual assault. So there's a lot of different caveats in that section. But if you have any questions while you're filling out your project or whatever, and are curious about the budget limits, please reach out and we can hopefully answer those questions for you. Now, the application process. Please review the notice of the funding opportunity in its entirety before starting your application. It's really just a good idea to review the entire thing just to make sure you understand all the requirements before you start putting everything together. The final page is also a checklist that will help you ensure that you have all the required documents included in your project. So, you know, at that checklist on, I believe it's on page 39, is a really good resource to make sure that you've hit all the things that are required. Please make sure all the documents requiring signatures are signed, and email the application to the aggrants@ag.nv.gov email by Monday, September 30th, 2024 by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Any applications received after that time, even by 1 minute, will not be accepted. And it's, you know, I'm sorry we have to put that limitation on there, but that is something that is required of us when we're applying for grants with the feds, and so we need to pass that requirement on as well. And we will get into more of the deadlines and timeline later on here in the presentation. So the application packet should contain all the information listed on the checklist I talked about, if applicable. These next several slides will contain some key components of the application packet, and descriptions and or templates of the attachments can be found on beginning on page 29 of the NOFO. So in the application packet, there will need to be a title page, a purpose area page, an applicant summary letter, the project narrative, attachments A through J, the agency self-assessment, and then if applicable, I'm sorry, on that previous slide, those are just some of the key points. There's a lot more documents required, but we really want to make sure we hit those key points. Now, if applicable, there's also requirements that are also listed on the checklist that are your certificates of liability, a board of directors if you have one, your federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement if you have one, and a letter of commitment from a service venue if that is required as part of your application. But please refer to the funding opportunity application content checklist to ensure all the documents have been provided. On the sexual assault services questionnaire, this is on the notice of funding opportunity on page 25. This must be completed in its entirety if and only if you are proposing sexual assault services. For any questions that do not apply to your project, please mark them with an NA. And this questionnaire, does not count towards the narrative page limits that are listed in the NOFO. The self-assessment questionnaires, all applicants must complete and submit the self-assessment questionnaire as part of their packet. This is actually located on the OAG website, where the notice of funding opportunity is also listed on the grant section. Indirect costs are fun indirect cost. If you have a federally negotiated rate agreement, that's where your indirect cost is, or the 15% de minimis, which is actually something new. I'm not sure if everybody has heard, but new uniform guidance has raised, as of October 1st, the de minimis rate from 10% to 15%. So just so you know that that's coming, and that will be need to be reflected in your budgets. if you are requesting indirect as part of your budget, you must use the federally negotiated rate agreement or the de minimis rate, and explain the modified total direct cost for the use of the 15% de minimis rate when you do your application. Reminders. Reminder to please use the forms provided in the Notice of Funding Opportunity packet. There are examples and samples that can be used in the NOFO, so please make sure you use those if you need to. Please see page 16 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the application content list. That will help you with making sure you have everything included as well. And of course, again, I'm going to mention it again, is the checklist on page 39. That will really help you ensure that you have everything required to submit a complete application. Indicating your purpose areas. There are 2 areas in the application packet where you need to identify the purpose areas your agency is addressing. The first one is on the second page of your title pages, and then the second one is on the scope of work table. Now, please make sure that when you're identifying these purpose areas that they match in both places. They should not differ from the one is on the second page of your title pages and the one that's on the scope of work table. They should be the same. Okay, and I told you we were going to talk about this again. So now here we are at the deadline again. And I know we harp on this quite a bit, but we really want to make sure everybody understands that the deadline for your application is by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, September 30th of 2024. Now, of course, we encourage you to submit it earlier if possible. We understand though, and believe me, I've submitted applications on the last day before they're due, so I completely understand. You will receive an application, and you will receive an email confirmation within the next business day after your application submission. If you do not receive a confirmation, we may not have received your application. Please follow up with us immediately. Sometimes this has happened with the state email systems, is though they may get caught up by our spam detector or something else. And so if you submit the application and you don't hear from us by the next business day, please, please, please reach out to make sure that we have received it, because we don't want to have something, technology issue, filter that email to where we don't receive it. Now, if the file size of your application is too large to send on one email, please label, you can break it into several emails, and please label the emails with email 1 of 3, for instance, and 2 of 3, and 3 of 3. So we are aware of how many emails you are sending, and that way we'll know if any of the emails are missing. It just makes it so much easier if you can't send a large file, if it does get blocked or gets kicked back to you, it may require that you submit several emails, and that is just fine. We just want to make sure that we receive all of the emails we are supposed to receive. And here is our timeline. So as you know, the release of the Notice of Funding Opportunity went out August 30th. And today, of course, we are doing the pre-application webinar. And in red there, Monday, September 30th by 5 p.m. is the deadline. We've harped on 3 different times now, I think. The week of October 21st is when we're going to be scheduling application reviews. So we'll take an initial look at it and split up the applications and then schedule application reviews. We're hoping to submit funding recommendations to our Chief Financial Officer on November 8th. We then are hoping to send out funding decisions by November 18th. And between November 18th and December 20th, we're going to send sub-grant awards to the funded agencies. And then January 1st, that should say January 1st, 2025, sorry about that, is when your funding will begin. The funding period will be January 1st, 2025 through December 31st of 2025. And expectations upon being, if your agency is funding, these are the key expectations of the subgrantee. Please note that these are cost reimbursable grants. Requests for reimbursements are submitted monthly following the month of expenses were incurred and paid. For example, January's reimbursement request would be due by February 15th. And for the Muskie report is going to be due annually, just like it always has been. It'll be due January 31st of 2026. And of course, that is for this funding opportunity. Of course, the current period we're in now, if you're funded out of the current grant, then that deadline is going to be January 31st, 2025. And it is submitted using an online tool. Something we're going to be starting is going to be just a quick quarterly report, which is going to be just giving an update on the status of the goals and objectives of the sub-recipient of your awards. That'll be due on the 30th of the month following the end of the quarter. For example, the first quarter of January through March would be due by April 30th. And we will provide a template for that. It's going to just be a very simple, almost like a status check on where you're at with your goals and objectives of the current grant. The on-site monitoring that is listed is, or technical assistance calls and communication with the OAG staff will be done on an as-needed basis. But funded programs must have a monitoring every 2 years. So some of you we may have already seen this year, which means we probably won't be out for another year and a half or so. Others that if this is your first time and you are able to be awarded funding, we will be setting up an on-site monitoring sometime during the 2025 grant period. And then, of course, if for some reason you're a longstanding subrecipient and want us to come in and do an additional monitoring, we are also happy to do that, or even just provide technical assistance as needed. Now, as more details on the reports and all the requirements and the expectations, more details on this will be provided during a post-award webinar for funded agencies after the decisions have been made. So these are just some general expectations on what is going to be kind of expected as a subrecipient. And here's our contact information. Of course, please use that aggrants@ag.nv.gov email. Please make sure you submit your applications to that email address. This is where we're going to keep track and make sure that we have received everything timely and within the deadline. You have my contact information right there. John DeCoco is the grants unit manager, and you also have Megan Nelson's. Unfortunately, Megan couldn't be here today, so that's why you got stuck with me. Stephanie Isaac is our administrative assistant, and she is usually the main point of contact for all of your requests for reimbursement and other details like that. So she is also listed here and is available if needed. The notice of funding opportunity and required documents are available online on our website. As you can tell, we've recycled this presentation, so that should be the 2025 Stop SASP Notice of Funding Opportunity. Sorry, we didn't catch that in the beginning. But you all should know where our website is, because that's probably where you got the link to join this meeting. And here we are. We are at questions. Jean, did we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, so we had one question that says, will the slides be available? Yes, they will be available on our website. We're going to upload those with the recording next week. And the next question is there a maximum amount organizations can apply for? There's no maximum amount. Just please keep in mind that STOP and SASP funds are limited, so you may or may not get what you asked for.
Yeah, that's a really good point on the maximum amount, because we are only awarded a certain amount too. So, you know, we have to operate within those limits as well to fund as much as we can statewide. And then the other thing about the presentation, we will be uploading a presentation that is actually more of a black and white version. So it'll be easier if anybody needs to print it. It won't eat up so much of your blue ink with all of our nice look. We'll provide one that's a little bit easier to print if needed. Any other questions in the chat?
That was all that came in. If you guys have any other questions, we'll give it a couple minutes for questions to come in the chat.
Yeah, please use the raise your hand feature, or if you want, you can just unmute and ask your question. It doesn't look like we have any questions. If you do think of a question later, please send an email over to Megan Nelson or to the AG Grants email. Then we'll get your questions answered as soon as possible, and we will add it to the Q&A sheet that we will put on the website along with this presentation, and the meeting recording will also be uploaded to that as well. Okay, well, no more questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So I just want to say thank you all for attending. We appreciate the work that you guys all do. And thank you for showing up for the webinar. I hope you guys have a great day.
Have a great day. Thank you.